Okay, we want to welcome our very, very extra special guest now. I remember about 2 years ago sitting down there with Frank sitting and hearing Matty outline his plans for the Road to Change walk. 10,000 miles around Europe, every European capital, meeting up with politicians and folk in charge of child protection. And I remember thinking, Rachel and me had just done the West Island Way the year before, 90 miles in 6 days, and at the end of it, money's fucked, you know. So I was sitting there thinking, Matty's a lovely guy, but that's impossible, that's not going to happen. After 3 or 4 weeks, he's going to be carried off to hospital with, you know, blisters in his blisters. But of course, this guy, you know, motivated by wanting to give a voice to voiceless people, the walk was impossible. It was impossible, but he's done it. And he's just flown in, jet-lagged from New York to tell us about it. So I think we want to give a standing ovation to this hero of our time, Dr. Matty McVarish.
Yeah, I'm a wee bit jet lagged, but I'm so happy to be here, and it's surreal to be standing on this stage. Like Craig just said, it was 2 years ago we did a fundraiser here, and the Glad Cafe have always been a huge supporter of Road to Change. So it's just today's just a chance to talk to you guys about the project Road to Change, the 10,000 mile walk around Europe, and just to tell you how it happened, how it came together, what it was, and what it's going to do next. So yeah. My name's Matty McVarish. I'm an actor. I'm also a playwright, and I'm a songwriter with Mr. Tom Ury. And so, where do we begin? I've got one of these cool wee things. It's so smashing. So this is me as an actor. This is a play that I wrote called To Kill a Kelpie. So, if you go back to 2008, I was an actor on a kids' TV show which is on every morning on CBeebies. And I was starting to write theatre professionally. And at that time, my brothers and I, we were all in a very strange place in our life, because when we were children, we were all sexually abused by our uncle. And we'd never really talked about it. It came up in conversation in 3 o'clock in the morning, and drunk and things like that, but we'd never addressed it. And at that time, my uncle was a school teacher, and he was a football coach with young teen boys. And in that moment, our silence was extremely dangerous, because by not reporting them, by not bringing them to justice, we were allowing them to continue with strange and dark behaviour. So I felt this intense responsibility to do something. But the problem is, nobody wants to talk about child sexual abuse, especially in 2008. This was kind of at a time before the Catholic Church, before Jimmy Savile, before the Penn State scandal, and it's characteristic in Scottish men, we don't really like to talk about sex with each other, especially not sex with children. So how do I approach that subject? All of my brothers were falling apart. We were all suffering from depression. I'd been suicidal. I'd been in therapy for many years. So being a writer, my way of dealing with it was to write a play. So this is the play I wrote. It's called To Kill a Kelpie. In the play, there's twin brothers. In reality, there was 4 of us. And in the play version, we were twins. Because if you do medical experiments, they often do it on twins too, because it's the closest you'll get to 2 versions of the same person. So they're called Dougal and Fingal. And Dougal, dressed in white there, Dougal is Gaelic, it means black stranger. And Fingal, dressed in black, Fingal means white stranger. The first line of the play is, "Hey stranger." And that's really important because my mum's brother, who was abusing all of her children, she thought she knew him, but in fact, he was a complete stranger to her. You know, and I think that's one of the frightening things about child sexual abuse, is that we're kind of comfortable talking about stranger danger, and Esther Ranson brought that in the 70s, and you like to believe that there's someone out there who's going to grab your children and do terrible things to them. Sadly, that's less than 5% of the reality. 95% of child sexual abuse is someone who the child knows and the child trusts. So like a school teacher or a football coach or a priest. And 40% of that is incest. 40% is within the family. So, who wants to talk about incest? Hi guys, how are you doing?
Bye bye.
Just on cue, there's my beautiful family. So I didn't so much have a plan. I didn't really have a plan, but I knew that in some way I had to talk about this. So, as I say, in 2008 I wrote this play. It was performed at Glasgow with professional actors. And I invited an organisation called the Moira Anderson Foundation, which is one of the greatest assets to this country. Moira Anderson Foundation is based in Airdrie, but they work nationally, and they provide counselling and legal advice to families affected by this issue specifically. I invited them to be at the show, to have their flyers everywhere, because you know if you watch EastEnders and there's a cot death storyline, at the end there's a phone number that says if you're affected by these issues, call this number. So we cloaked the production in this, what to do if this triggers you. And that's pretty much what happened. The play was performed, and my brothers, we came to see it, and it kind of catalysed the discussion, and I think we all knew that we had to act. And it wasn't for revenge, it wasn't to gain compensation, it was about child protection. We had to move and we had to do it right there and then. So, it's a strange thing to say, but we were lucky to be in Scotland, because when we pressed charges, my uncle was immediately arrested and sentenced. And so, my uncle, he went to prison within a year of To Kill a Kelpie being produced in Glasgow. So, you can see he was my godfather. I used to be named after him. My name was Matthew Terence Smith. And when I was a teenager, after I told him to leave me alone, I changed my middle name to Matthew Raphael, because Raphael is the angel of healing. I didn't want to be named after this guy. So, aye. Now the cool thing was, this year is To Kill a Kelpie, the movie that my brother Eddie over there directed, because the play had created this massive change in our family. For years we were silent, and the play catalysed the discussion, and it catalysed the criminal prosecution. And that's quite a transformation that you would hope that all families affected would get to. So we took the play, I went to the Scottish Government, they gave me 20 grand, and we took the play to New York, and we did the same model. After the play was performed, I sat on stage with a panel of local service providers, a bit like the New York version of Moira Anderson Foundation. And I very openly said to the audience, this story you've just witnessed was inspired by true events, and I talked really openly about how that came together. And after every performance, we had people in the audience disclosing histories of abuse, sometimes for the very first time. And then we toured it. We went to San Francisco, Chicago, DC, San Diego, and again, the play was catalysing actual change. People for the very first time were talking about it. There was a guy in San Francisco who was, I think he was 68 and his brother was 70, and he said they were abused by their stepfather 60 years ago and they'd never talked about it. But after watching To Kill a Kelpie, he went home and called his brother. And the thing is, like, it can seem a bit airy-fairy, but art can really open up people and it can create real social change. It's a really powerful medium. And it's interesting to remember that any time a fascist dictator comes into power, the first thing they do is close down the artists, because that's how we breathe, that's how our souls breathe. So, this is the film because it costs 50 grand to tour a play, but it costs nothing to tour a DVD. So my brother is a very skilled filmmaker. We shot this in a week, and it's now being used. The film version of To Kill a Kelpie is touring universities with the same model. We've done screenings across America. We did one in Atlanta for the CDC, the Center of Disease Control. That's the American research facility that does all research into pretty much anything that happens in America. So yeah, so here it was now. It was 2011, and we had this film and we had this play, and we knew how powerful it was and how important it was to spread this film and this piece of work. At that point, I was living in London, and I think I was lying in the bath, and I thought it would be really cool to show this film across the world in every city. And I thought, well, let's start with Europe. Imagine you did a film screening in every city in Europe. And then I was thinking, who's going to give me money to fly to every city in Europe and do a film tour? They're not really going to buy into what I'm saying. It would take a lot of convincing. So, with no money, how do you get around Europe? And I thought, well, maybe if I walk, maybe. And that was a pretty cool idea, because I remember when I was 11, sometimes after he'd abused me, my uncle would take me to see a film. I don't know if that was to make me feel better, or maybe it was to make him feel better. But one night when I was 11, he took me to see Forrest Gump. And if you know that movie, Forrest runs across America for 3 years. And every time he runs into a town or a city, he gets rushed by journalists, and they say, why are you doing this? Are you running for world peace? Are you running for equality? And bless him, Forrest just says, well, I just felt like running. And even back then when I was 11, I was thinking, that's a shame. If he had something to say, if he had a message to share, it would reach millions of people for free, you know. And the other thing was, about the time when I was 11, my uncle had specifically said, don't tell anyone. And so I thought, right, how do I tell 500 million people? So, the road to change. On May 31st, 2013, and there's a cool wee button here I can show you, there we go. I left from London, I went to Paris, Luxembourg, that was Brussels, Amsterdam, and I just walked to every single capital city in the EU. And I walked to, because it's extraordinary, and I'm trying to raise awareness of the thing that nobody wants to talk about. If you can imagine, in the UK, child sexual abuse is in the news practically daily. But over over here in the Baltics, the journalists will tell me they'd never met a man before who talked about these issues. And it's not important that it was me talking about it, it's important, historically significant in these countries that any man stood up and said, yes, this happened to me. So that was successful. The road to change was on television, newspapers and radios in 30 languages. I've got a friend who translates Russian documents for the American government. And in Estonia, I was translating on radio into Russian. And he called me and said, I have never heard these things talked about in Russian. And he'd worked in that language for 30 years. So that was the first goal of the road to change, was to raise awareness, because awareness is key to this issue, because it exists in silence, to catalyse the discussion in as many ways as possible. We did film screenings. We did some in Stockholm, Luxembourg, Bucharest, Slovenia. We did film screenings. And with enough notice, we were able to get translations done through the British embassies and stuff. So that was cool. But it seemed like it needs to be more than that. I'm going to a lot of effort here to go this far, so we should really try and create actual, measurable, lasting change. So although I was walking to attract the media, my goal in every city was the government. I knocked on the doors of governments and parliaments, and I asked them to abolish the statute of limitations. So I don't want to get too technical about what that is, but basically, my uncle abused me in Scotland. I was 25 when we all pressed charges, and he was immediately arrested on our evidence and was sentenced. But if he'd abused me in Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, he would not have been arrested. The same crime, with the same evidence, he would have just been left a repeat child sex offender with 4 known victims, would have been completely free and in contact with children, because it had taken me 12 years from the last time he abused me to actually come forward. So it's a practical thing, you know. If your car's stolen, if you report it 5 years later, there's not a lot they can do. It's a legal thing. But with this crime, it's so specific because, as we can see in the neurological research, if you interfere with a child, you alter the brain chemistry, and that doesn't really. You look at the child and they look fine exteriorly. It will manifest later in their psychology. So if you start to look, there's a thing called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study from 1998, and it began as a study into obesity. You know, it began, why do people become obese? And with the more people they interviewed, they began to see a pattern. Everyone struggling with an eating disorder it began way back in their childhood with a certain trauma. Not always child sexual abuse, but very often. And it became a study of how something traumatic in your childhood alters the entire direction of your life. So, to give you a couple of examples, if you've been sexually abused in childhood, you're more likely to smoke. You're twice as likely to smoke. I was outside smoking a minute ago. If you're a smoker, I know, Susie's raging. If you're a smoker, you're more likely to die of smoking-related diseases. So by sexually abusing a child, it's basically all these different ways. 97% of teen runaways are sexually abused to children. I think 32% of people incarcerated for homicide were sexually abused to children. If you start to look at any country, look at all the social ills they have, you know, homelessness, anything, even cancer. They've managed to find a link between a trauma in your childhood, the physiological stress that you live with, will manifest eventually as cancer. Now that research is relatively new, and it's getting more sophisticated every day practically. So this is what we now know. So anyway, I was going to all these governments and I was asking them to look at this. And practically every government we spoke to agreed with us. And we were pretty chuffed to say that about 8 governments of the 29 countries I walked to, 8 governments said, okay, we're going to look at this, we're going to begin the discussion. I think the coolest one was in Hungary. I spoke in Budapest at the International Victims' Day, and I just said, if my uncle abused me in this country, you wouldn't have arrested him. You would be free when you'd be in contact with your kids. 9 months after that speech, they abolished it. Slovakia, just here, Slovakia, 3 days after I spoke at the Parliament, launched a motion in Parliament to abolish it. And now we've got Portugal, Malta, all the Baltic states, even Romania are beginning to look at how they can take that action. And that was pretty cool. I didn't think it was going to be a complete blanket, everyone's going to agree with me. But, so yeah, so just to show you some of the highlights of the walk itself. This is Helsinki in Finland. This is kind of became one of the iconic images of the walk. I walked in the kilt the whole way because I was trying to draw attention. Attention seeking. I was really trying to draw attention to myself. I wasn't trying to be inconspicuous. I want people to go, who's that guy and what's he doing here? And so if you imagine walking across the border into a country, I walk through tiny little towns and people go, look at that guy in the skirt. And then a couple of days later they would see me when I'd reached their city, I'd be on television. And then I love to imagine all these little towns going, oh, we saw him, he was here. And this is what he's talking about. And it was a really simple process. I would walk about 30 miles every day. Stiggle, my colleague there, he would drive a van, which, a lovely van, where we sat. It was something like Father Ted. We called the van the Vaughan. And so he would drive that about 30 miles a day. We had another colleague, Amanda, she would kind of fly ahead to the city I was walking to. And we're so grateful to the British embassies. In every single country, the British embassies supported the Road to Change. Very often the British ambassador would come out and walk with me to show solidarity that Britain is completely behind child protection. Sometimes that was quite awkward because my costume or my uniform was like I had the saltire on my chest and I'm wearing a kilt, and some of the ambassadors would say, so where do you stand on the independence? So I might as well say freedom tattooed across my head, But yeah, so where we go? This was in Cyprus. And you might go, how did you walk to Cyprus? Well, there's no boats from Greece to Cyprus, but it's an EU country, so I wanted to go there. I walked from Athens, 29 kilometres to Athens airport. I walked through the airport, onto the plane, and the plane took off and it landed in Cyprus in Larnaca. And again, I stood up from the same seat, I walked through the airport and across the country to their capital city, Nicosia. So as much as is physically possible, I literally walked every step from one city to another. So it wasn't really one big walk, it was like 30 different little walks from the centre of this city to the centre of the next one. And that's the Alps. This was the only time that I left the European Union was when I went into Switzerland, because I was invited to speak at the United Nations. And I can promise you, the size of this operation was just, my brother Mojo was here in Glasgow, he was the 4th member of the team. And so if you can imagine, Stig and I and Amanda were it was a bit like Apollo 13. We were out in the wilderness in this tin box, and Mojo was here in Glasgow. More than one occasion we would say, Bella Houston, we have a problem. So we would call him up, and he was incredible, because if you imagine, things like charging your phone was a nightmare, if you're constantly moving on to the next place. So eventually we got these solar panels and we drilled onto the top of the van. We didn't realise that drilling 12 holes in the roof would affect the waterproofing of the van, so eventually we used to tape plastic bags to catch the water, and you would actually go from being asleep to standing up and catching a bag in mid-air of water before landing on your bed. So yeah, so I went to the United Nations, I spoke at the UN, and that was the week of the referendum. I didn't know that was going to happen in that way. On the Monday I spoke, gave a presentation about the Road to Change, and on the Thursday was the referendum. So I'm walking about United Nations dressed as the Scottish ambassador, and all the delegates from like Hawaii and the Catalonia, anywhere in the world there's an independence discussion, were making a beeline for me and saying, how's it looking, what's happening? And it was the British delegation again who were hosting the Road to Change at the UN, so it was intensely awkward, and I was being very diplomatic. But I hadn't been home at that point in nearly 2 years, so I didn't really know how it was feeling here. You know, so it was strange. But my idea was that I'm going to walk around Europe. I'll speak to all the countries individually, and then I'll go to the UN, and I'll speak to representatives from the whole world. And if you've ever been to the UN, or when you go, it's a fascinating place, because you might have a room of 200 people, and every person represents an entire country. So this one guy here represents, you know, like 360 million people in the United States. This one voice over here. And I was hoping that I'll just share with you guys this problem we have with the legislation, this child protection issue, and all of you will just run home and fix your country, and then I can go up the road, you know, next plane back to Glasgow. And it didn't quite turn out that way. Now, what was cool was a representative from the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, sorry, not the Council of Europe, the UN, so the office of the Secretary General of the UN was present when I gave this speech. And then he left, and I was like, right. So they were just watching what we were doing. But I felt a real sense, coupled with the referendum result, that week I was so disappointed. I felt, this isn't me. I've walked around and I was trying to create this change, and I spoke to the people who can create that change, and it didn't quite happen. So I felt really raging that it's not quite done it yet. Don't worry. There's a big one. I was invited, I wrote to Pope Francis whilst I was walking, because I was walking to reach millions of people, but I figured if he spoke, it would reach billions. I was raised Catholic, but I'm not a Catholic anymore as such. But whether you're Catholic or not, Pope Francis is a world leader. And so I wrote to him about a year before I knew I would reach Rome, and I said, I told him about the mission. The Vatican wrote back to the office in Edinburgh, the Maud Anderson Foundation, who were helping us out, and they just said, okay, tell us more about what you're doing. And they wanted us to fax them. So Stig and I are in a van in Romania, like, hey, do you get a fax machine? So it was very mysterious how you meet the Pope. So we sent a fax back in whatever way we could, told them who we wanted to bring, what we wanted to do, what we wanted to say to them. And it was a few countries later, eventually I was walking through Sicily, and my phone rang and answered it, and he says, hello, this is Father, whatever, from the papal household. I went, right. He said, I want to speak to you about your appointment with Pope Francis. I said, okay. I said, I've got a couple of colleagues who want to be there as well. Can I just call them and just check the time and then I'll call you back? And he said, no. I was like, okay. So if you can imagine, Sicily, if you've ever been, is like this. It's like an egg box upside down. And I get signal up here, but I don't get signal down here. So I pretty much just had to stand where I was. He said, I'll call you back in 2 hours. So I just stood there. I phoned everyone and I waited, and they called back and we confirmed the meeting. So I was going to meet him, but meeting the Pope is one of the biggest experiences of my life, not just of the walk. It's half of my brain was like, right, here he comes. This guy is the head of the Catholic Church. That's the organisation responsible for, we don't know how many cover-ups of paedophiles. Also, their stance on contraception is actively spreading AIDS in Africa. And their stance on LGBT issues is contributing to the many teen suicides of trans and gay children. So that was half of my brain was like, right, I'm just going to tell this guy. And the other half of my brain was like, it's the Pope. You know? It's a bit like meeting Santa Claus. I'm like, oh my God, literally, you know? And there was, so we're in the Vatican, there was about 7,000 people when it started, but only a small row of us had this golden ticket to speak to him. He was on a stage, they read prayers in various languages, and then eventually he was coming down. The lady beside me was from Miami, and she had cancer, but she was a very wealthy banker, so I don't know how she managed to be here, but there was people over here, I think it was from Iran, and he had his children with him, again another very wealthy looking man. So the Pope was in front of me, and I had a big spiel ready. I was just going to lay it out, but what came out of my mouth would surprise me. When he was right in front of me, I just said, Papa, my uncle abused me when I was a child. And before I even kicked into my spiel, he just put his hand on my head and he blessed me. And so that, for me, I think as anyone who's been sexually abused, you want your voice to be heard, you want to be acknowledged, you want to know that what happened to you wasn't your fault and it should never have happened. And I'd become a kind of political voice. I've been speaking to all these politicians, and then suddenly it was just me remembering what happened to put me on this journey. And then I kicked into my spiel, and I showed him the route that I'd walked around, and it was incredible. So I was wondering if he was going to make a comment, if the Vatican were going to say anything about Road to Change. But I think, in actual fact, the comment was that he met me. The comment was that he allowed us to take footage and video and pictures of the moment, and we shared that. And what was lovely to watch is, because I couldn't really, I was on Facebook and texting, I was trying to stay in touch with people back home, but we just felt this massive lift in the project, because people kind of turned around and the Scottish press suddenly went, oh look, there's that mad guy walking, he's now with the Pope. And the whole project just lifted up to another level, which we could never have anticipated. So that was cool. Now, after I met the Pope, and after I spoke at the United Nations, like I say, I was leaving the UN with a sense of real disappointment. Like, I didn't quite do it, I didn't quite get to the people I wanted to speak to. So, before we get too technical, I'll explain how this happened. When I was in Croatia, I spoke to their child ombudsman, and I said, I'm here to ask you to abolish the statute of limitations, because as you have it in the now, the children in your country can't press charges, and it's a disaster. And they said, we can't abolish it because we just created it. I was like, why would you do that? Why would you bring in a law that restricts the human rights of millions of kids? And it turned out there has been an error. In 2007, the Council of Europe, which is the 47 countries in Europe, not just the 29 of the European Union, but all, like Norway and Albania, all of Europe, signed a treaty called the Lanzarote Convention. And the article about the statute of limitations, Article 33, says, your country's limitation must be sufficient that the victim has time to come forward. And I was like, well, what's a sufficient restriction, other than a contradiction in terms? So what I discovered in that meeting was that there had been a misinterpretation of this article. Somebody basically lost some translation of that article, and when they ratified it in their country, instead of helping the kids, they actually restricted the human rights of the kids now and for future generations. And this blew my mind. I was like, why doesn't everyone know that this has happened and this has to get fixed? So with that under my belt, that discovery, and the kind of frustration of the referendum result, and the kind of anticlimax of speaking at the UN, all these things were the perfect storm to give me the arrogance to call up the Council of Europe and say, I want to give a presentation to the Lanzarote Committee. I want to speak to the people responsible for that treaty and who can change it and who can fix this. So this man here is the Secretary General. He's the highest politician in the continent of Europe. He's the man who gave Barack Obama and Malala the Nobel Peace Prize. I was amazed when I got there that I was getting a meeting with him. I thought I was just going to speak to the committee. But I think by the time I'd gotten there, and I got a strange email saying the Council of Europe is watching you. They know. They're very aware of what you've been doing. So when I got there, I walked with him. He's from Norway. And again, I just sat with him, and I don't know where I'd got the ability to speak to people in the world like this level, like the Pope and the man here. But when you have a message that you know is absolutely right, when you know you're speaking on behalf of millions of people who don't have a voice, then it's very easy to talk. You just say, look, this is the problem. With absolutely no pretension, you just lay it out and go, look, please look at this. So, what was really cool was the perfect timing of the Road to Change in relation to the UN, because in 1989, the United Nations created a thing called the UN Rights of the Child Convention. This was a document signed by every country in the world except Somalia and the United States. And it was the basic standards of human rights. So I'm sure you all know you've got human rights, of course you do. But they mean nothing unless the people in charge of you in your life uphold your rights. In America they have the Declaration of Independence. I would tell you the Scottish one, but I've not written one yet. So I'll quote their one. It says, I hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and born with certain inalienable rights endowed by their Creator. It says endowed by their Creator. It doesn't say bestowed upon them by your government. By the very virtue of being born, you have rights. So it's not at the behest of any government, of any institution to grant you rights. You automatically have rights just by being here. It's up to the government, in fact it's up to every adult, every rational adult, it's up to you to uphold the rights of children. So, every country in Europe, all 47 in the Council of Europe, signed the UN Rights to the Child Convention. So I read it very carefully. And the statute of limitations, as it stands now in most European countries, contradicts 8 articles in the UN Rights to the Child Convention. So all I had to do was go to these governments and say, look, see that law? That contradicts this treaty that you signed 25 years ago. And 25 years ago came up in November. That was the 25th anniversary of this convention. So the Council of Europe were already planning. I was there in October. In November they were already going to be having these 25th anniversary conferences on this treaty. And the perfect time of Road to Change arriving basically mean we just got right in there. So I've been invited back on June 17th to give a full presentation on the Road to Change, on the statute of limitations. And that's going to be in Strasbourg, right here. And yesterday I was in the United States and I met the UN again, and I've been told that the United Nations would like me to come back and do another presentation for the UN the day after my presentation in Strasbourg. So get it in. Now it's this wee guy we met when I was walking from Portsmouth to Cardiff. This little guy called Alfie. And it was so nice to meet him and walk with him. And the thing was, he wanted to meet me because I'm Raymond and me too. He knows nothing of the Road to Change. And I think when I was walking, I started to think, every step I take with my right foot is for a survivor out there, and there's millions of them. I'm taking a step for a survivor who hasn't found their voice yet, who hasn't seen Kelpie yet, who hasn't realised the life-transforming journey that you go on in healing and justice when you speak. So I take a step forward for them, and on my left foot I would take a step for these wee guys, because it's all about them. I would take a step with this foot for a child who will never be abused because of the work that we're doing now, because we're altering the trajectory of the world. And I think I've just done just under 48 million steps. So this year, I think you took this, Craig, I nicked off your YouTube video. This was the last mile in Edinburgh. And I was so blown away because Stig and Amanda and I, we were off around Europe and we were on our own. Half the time our phones were dead or stolen or whatever. And we didn't really know how it was feeling back here. So to come back and see over 1,000 people walk the last mile with me from Edinburgh Castle to the Scottish Parliament, it just, that whole week was mind-blowing. You know, it was just one thing after another. And when I did this walk, I realised the Road to Change is not my walk. So many people that day came up to me and told me, what you've done inspired me to speak to my family for the first time, inspired me to press charges or see a therapist. And so all of these people, and many of them in different ways contributed to the walk. They gave us a night on their couch, or they gave us some money, or they did a fundraiser. This is all these people on the Road to Change, and all you guys here. So that was fun. Oh, they gave me a doctorate as well. I had no idea that was going to happen. When I got to Glasgow, the school where I went trained as an actor invited me to host a reception just to welcome us back to our own city. And I thought, when I did a master's degree there, I was working abroad when we had graduation. So I thought when I got there, I saw them dressed up in this stuff. I'd missed my graduation from my master's, and I thought, oh, that's dead nice. Finally, I get my photo with the thing, you know. And I thought that's what was happening. So when they said doctor, I was like, it blew my mind, literally. I knew I'd won this other award that I knew I was going to be accepting, so I kind of thought, what will I say about this that night? But it was insane. But the cool thing is, sometimes when I was walking around as this guy from Kids TV talking about child sexual abuse, a few governments were like, who is he and what does he want? But at the moment, when I got back, I called the Lord Provost of Glasgow, and I said, I'd like to speak to you about our child protection measures here in Glasgow, because, you know, like I say, I was fortunate to be sexually abused in Scotland, but because we don't have a statute of limitations, we have a police force who listen to us, we have services like the Warren Anderson Foundation, and the majority of kids of Europe don't have any of those three things. But we're not the flagship for child protection. There's other countries in Scandinavia who are doing a lot better than us. They have much more sophisticated processes in place, much better training materials for their kids. And so the Council of Europe have asked me to advocate the 1 in 5 campaign. Now don't be frightened, this campaign teaches kids, infants, the underwear rule, right? It doesn't sexualise the kid or give them any understanding or even visualisations of what abuse is. It just opens up their channels of dialogue with their parents. So if a kid has anything they're scared to talk about, it teaches them how to talk about it, that's all. And they can apply that to various things in their life. It also gives the parents the practical steps to take if your child reveals something that needs addressed. Because in the past, the plan of action was always silence. They believed that you're going to be stigmatised if people find out this happened to you, so the better thing is don't tell anyone it happened. That's literally the worst thing you could do. Here's my family. In 1997, in 1997 we said, don't tell anyone, because it'll tear up the family. But you can see there, and they're here tonight, my family are more together now because we talked about it. And I mean, it's incredible when I think that I didn't have a plan as such. I didn't know that we were going to become more authentically together just by doing this mad journey. But when I got there, all the way, his mum and dad, everyone, completely in awareness of what had actually happened, what we'd been through, and we're completely together, and together we walked in the Royal Mile. So, if nothing else, my uncle had said don't tell anyone, so I'm sure he wasn't imagining I'll tell the Pope. It's not really. So, and the thing is, it's like anything else, the more you tell people, the easier it gets, and you know, it is a horrible thing to talk about, but it's like emotional cancer. If you don't address it, it doesn't go away, it literally just festers and it'll get worse. So the sooner you deal with it, the sooner it goes away. I can't remember what I put next. Alright, just to show you, the Road to Change, this is our website. We were supported by the Moyne Action Foundation. They've invited me to be their international ambassador, which I'm so honoured to be. We have Ariel Foundation International. Dr. Ariel King works at the UN. She invited me to speak at the UN. That's how we reached to that level of policymakers. Innocence in Danger have 8 offices internationally, and I hooked up with one in Berlin, and they helped us get to the German government and stuff. And this here is the new foundation. It's called the Raphael International Foundation, named after my new middle name. And it says Inspire Creation. You can't really see it, it's not very big. But it's Raphael International Foundation, Inspire Creation. So by doing the Road to Change, I realised how incredible art and music and theatre, the power of that, what you can do with that, you can change the world with creativity. And so I formed an organisation, it's based in New York, called the Raphael International Foundation. We're opening an office here in Scotland, we've got a board meeting tomorrow in Edinburgh. And this weekend in New York we had a launch with heads of Broadway theatre were there. And they're all really excited about what we're going to do. So we're going to be taking art to underprivileged and disadvantaged kids in the world. So some of the best artists in the world are going to be working with the most ignored and underheard kids. So I'm going back to Lithuania to work with an orphanage that I met on the walk. And we're just going to be, the tagline is saying, use art to help kids realise they're awesome. You don't have to go through a trauma and then have to do all that therapy to realise actually that wasn't my fault. Start with teaching kids. You're amazing, you're limitless in your potential. Start from that perspective. And do it through art, because it has that transformative kind of, it's all of that. So that's one of the cool legacies of the Road to Change, is the Raphael Foundation. And this was yesterday. I was in New York City, I was invited to march in the Tartan Day Parade. So this was yesterday. This, oops, I don't know. Anyway, open up again. Too many buttons. I'm very jet lagged, sorry. That lady there is Randa Fox. She is the founder of Not on Our Watch America Foundation. She walked with me from Slovenia to Croatia every day, which was awesome. We talked the entire way. If you hit that button down there, that'll get bigger, Joe. That button here.
This one?
No, 2 across from
That.
That's my vision board. So there's Randa. We're marching down Fifth Avenue in the Tartan Day Parade, and it was cool because I got a shout out for being the top Scot. They told New York, all the people standing around, about the Road to Change. And Randa and I were excited to work on Road to Change US 2017. But don't worry, I'm not going to be walking. When I did the last mile, I realised how many people, how their lives were enriched and how they'd been transformed by this project. And I thought, we should have did this last mile in every city that I walked to, but we just didn't have the money and the funding and the backing. So the plan is to repeat the project in the United States, but we're going to have 50 champion walkers. We're going to get local celebrities or local survivors, and they're going to march from one capital to the next one, all 50 states. It's going to take about 2 years. And in every single city, the Not on Our Watch America Foundation is going to host the last mile with as many people as we can get, and I'm sure it'll be thousands, coming out and celebrating just healing and child protection. The other thing the Raphael International Foundation is going to be doing is we're going to collaborate with artists, and we're going to, every week, as well as speaking to politicians, we're going to have concerts, we're going to have dance performances, galleries, all that kind of stuff to celebrate creativity and how to use that for healing. So that's the model that we're moving forward with. We've already got some interest. As I say, the UN are really interested in what we're doing. So that's for the future. But I think that is the last one, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
How long have I been talking? So that's basically what happened and how it happened. It's surreal to be back home and be safe, because if you imagine, there was days when I walked through a hurricane in Poland, I walked through a blizzard in Wales, right through Snowdonia, literally, and I met more wild dogs than people. But as I said at the night they gave me that doctorate, I said, I didn't do this, we did this. You know, Stiggo drove the van, Amanda helped put together the meetings, Mojo dealt with practically every tangible aspect, I mean, the website and all the flyers and all that stuff. And without everyone's contribution, all the people who gave us a night on their couch and all the times you guys did fundraisers, without all of that, the Road to Change wouldn't have happened. So you guys and us collectively have helped shift the world. And again, in June, and let's all be sending good thoughts to Strasbourg in June, we have the potential there to create a change which is going to affect a continent of 820 million people. And in the United States, when we do it there, again, another 360 million. So, any questions? Any questions at all? I can just keep talking. I mean, there's plenty of other stuff I can talk about.
What's your plans for the book?
What's my plans for the book? Well, when the walk finished in February, I was scared that I was becoming a politician. You know, no offence to politicians, but it's not the life for me. So I got back, and the first thing I did was I went to see my agent, because I was like, I'm an artist. I'm not any of this political stuff. I went down to London straight away to see my agent, and I collapsed of exhaustion. It hadn't occurred to me, I'd just been walking 30 miles a day for 10 years. So, and I didn't get to the meeting, so I'm going back down this week, because I feel a lot better, to speak to an agent. And basically, the book is going to obviously be the whole story, encapsulating how we did it, put it together. And I was going to try really fast and write it for this year and do a thing at the Edinburgh Book Festival in August. But I think I want to tell the story properly, and I want to put in, if anyone wants to take it as a handbook of how to change the world. I was going to call it Change the World in 48 Million Easy Steps. But I don't know what I'm going to call it, and it'll probably be next summer, and we'll do a launch, and I hope you'll all be there.
Tell us about your cat.
My cat. So I was walking one day in Slovenia, Croatia or Slovenia, and I'm walking, it was up a mountain, and it was quite far from civilization. And I heard this wee voice, and I looked around, couldn't find it, and down a storm drain was this tiny wee kitten. And I guess on the farmlands in Slovenia, cats have probably looked like vermin, you know, they're just to keep breeding. So the farmer must have taken it up to the mountain and abandoned it, you know, because there was no way that a cat could walk that far, especially when this tiny. So I picked her up, and I could see she was malnourished and dehydrated, and she had lice, and she was terrified. And so I carried her to the van, which I didn't realise at that point was 2 hours away. And I got to the van and I said to Stiggle, "We've got a cat." And I said, find a vet. So it didn't cost very much. It was only €5 for the cat passport. So we got her all the shots and rescued a cat. But she now lives in a beautiful home in France because she was living in the van for a month, and every time we opened the door she was getting so big she kept trying to jump out. We were always parked at the side of a busy road, so it wasn't safe for her. So my friend who lives in France said, "I'll look after her." And I think I haven't settled yet. I'm not homeless. I have many homes, but I don't live anywhere. And so when I do finally settle somewhere, I'll perhaps get her brought over because she's got a passport. But the nicest thing about that for me spiritually was when I was a child, we had 2 cats, and when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I used to batter this wee cat. As soon as I was in the room on my own, I would pick it up and throw it against the wall, and I would basically terrorise this little kitten to the point that she was so anxious she licked off all her fur and had to be put down. And as a Catholic, I went to confession, and the priest was asking me, what have you been up to? And when you're 8, what can you confess? And I said, well, I'm really bad to my cat. And his name was Father Dunneke. He said, tell me about that. And I said, well, when nobody's in, I'll just battle the cat, and I'll just throw her against the wall. And he said, is anyone being bad to you? And it frightened me that he said that, because I knew there was, but I didn't want to. I just knew instantly that I shouldn't say anything, so I just said no. And it was funny that I accidentally, well, not accidentally, but I channeling that aggression, and I think that's a good lesson to take with you. If you ever witness a child maltreating animals, children are not aggressive. They're not bad behaviour from nowhere. Investigate what's causing that behaviour. Look at what are they channeling. So it was nice in the road to change that I got to save a cat. It's one of the loveliest things that happened. But Tom was calling me Shrek because I also saved a donkey. A cat and a donkey. And a wee sheep got his head stuck in a fence at any point. Bless him.
Hearing about it, I still don't believe it. Do you believe that? Did that happen? If that happened, that is surely one of the most important things that's happened in my lifetime. So, we close with the final hymn on your song sheet. Thank you very much for coming, and I think again, before we finish, we just want to say thank you so much to Stiggle, Tom, and all the team, and especially our heroic walker, Matty McVarish.
Nice and warm. Nice. Don't really get me. You keep saying you got something for me, something you call love, but confess you've been a mess where you should be messing, and now someone else is getting all your best. These boots are made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over me. You keep lying when you ought to be truthing. You keep losing when you ought to not bet. You keep saying when you ought to be changing. Now what's right is right, but you ain't been right yet. These boots are made for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days, these boots are gonna